Hi, April. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Lauren.
Okay, so start by telling the listeners who you are, sharing something about you that we wouldn't find on your resume.
Okay. So my name's April Little. I am a leadership and executive career coach, and I've been coaching full time for the last 2 years. Prior to that, I spent my entire career in recruiting and human resources, and I left my career as a VP of HR. I still work in that role fractionally for the startup that I was at. And I primarily work with women that are somewhere in the middle of the organization chart. So they are managers, senior managers with aspirations of becoming VP C suite. So my primary focus is internal advancement, but there are times where sometimes that will go external. And I
Yeah.
do work with women that are looking for external opportunities. They're looking for that external promotion that may not be available to them internally.
Yeah, and also explain what fractional means really quickly, because this is kind of a newish term. I've talked about it a little bit on the podcast because I kind of love that this is becoming a career option. So just explain what fractional means if someone's never heard of it.
Sure. So I still hold my title. I'm still immersed in the organization. I know exactly what's going on, but I am only there part of the time. So I am at the startup probably 5 hours a week, and I'm providing advisement to the CEO. If there are confidential searches, I'm providing that as well. But fractional really is someone who is still holding their title, but they might be doing it more in a contractual part-time kind of way.
Yeah, you're literally doing it a fraction of the time you were doing it
Yes.
before. Yeah, I love it. Okay, and then tell us something that we about you that we wouldn't find on your resume.
I love period pieces, and I right now I'm kind of watching Shogun, so I prefer my drama to unfold via a note from a raven or horseback versus a text message. So yes,
I
so
love
something
it.
about
I
me.
love it.
Yeah.
I also really love period pieces. I got really deep into oh gosh, what's the show where it's in Scotland? She travels through Outlander. Which
Outlander.
yeah, I got really into that over break. And like had to binge it all. My husband says that's not really a period piece because they're traveling through time, and I'm
Yeah,
like, okay, but they go really far back in time, so it counts.
we do.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get into sort of the tactical advice, I'm curious what strategic relationships you've had in your career and what opportunities they've led to. I think whether you're searching for a new job or you're in a job, you constantly are told about relationships, relationships, relationships. And that's because we are people, we work with people, and we're relationship minded. So tell us kind of your backstory with strategic relationships.
Yeah, so I actually, this is an example of a strategic relationship, Lauren. I met you on LinkedIn. We have been engaging with each other's content, for a few months. But prior to that, from a career perspective, my earliest experience with building relationships, and I'm going to use the a peer one because sometimes we focus on building relationships up, is I have gotten several opportunities from just having really strong peer relationships in the workplace, whether that be, hey, there's a posting that's available and maybe I didn't know about it. Um, Even from LinkedIn, every job that I've had since 2014 is the result of a relationship. I did
Oh,
not
wow. I
actively
love that.
apply.
Yeah.
And some of those relationships were with recruiters at staffing agencies. So if you are listening and you're looking for a job, some of my some of my really closest colleagues right now are external headhunter recruiters. And it's not because I need anything. I just happen to keep in touch with them because I love all things recruiting. And so when something became available, I was called up for it.
Yeah. I feel like I mean I've heard tons of great stories about people who sat next to someone on an airplane and it led to a relationship. I think they met someone at an event, but they always think about like the person that they don't know that they're meeting. But then you have to remember, for example, when I used to work at Hulu, I think about all the people I worked with at Hulu now work at other companies, and those are strategic relationships that now actually present for me a bigger network within other companies
Yeah.
too. So I love that you talked about peer networking. There's another person, Hillary Kerr. She has a podcast, and she used to run Who, What, Where, or maybe she still does. And she used to talk a lot about that. Like she started at the editorial desk at Elle, and like her and her peers have grown up, and now they're like running companies or at least senior level. And it's like those were all peer relationships. So I think that's a really really strong
Yeah.
point. It's just like strategic relationship building doesn't have to be necessarily something you're always putting down on paper and kind of thinking about like that, but you're being mindful. Obviously we are going to get into some
Yes,
tactical advice, but I think what people also want to know is like maybe what are some of the misconceptions that people have when it comes to strategic relationship building. And I'm trying to keep using the word relationship building because I think networking makes people cringe. So what are
it
some
does.
common misconceptions about this?
I think that one of the common misconceptions is that they build the relationship based off of needing something. Again, going into networking without using
Yeah.
that word. And I think that a lot of it is very similar to the way we pick our friends, the
Yeah.
way we might even pick our partners. If you're looking for genuine chemistry, maybe you're not going to divulge all your life secrets to this person, but you might have something deeply in common with them. Like we connect now over period pieces and we're just chatting about that. Or there are some really cool individuals I've even met this past year that have written books. I don't want to write a book right now, but eventually I do. And I love soaking up anything that they share about it.
Yeah.
And in exchange, it's strategic because I am not looking to be one sided with the transaction. I try to offer up value as well every time we speak. Even and that's not necessarily value in terms of like, okay, let's do some tit for tat here.
Yeah.
It is genuinely getting to know people and building what I call second tier friendships. That's the best
Yeah.
way I can kind of
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a good way to describe it.
yeah.
It's interesting you say the word value and you're like, well, let me clarify that because you're right. People, I think, get a little nervous where they're like, what value can I offer this person? Sometimes just asking the person about their career story and listening is like providing value. Like they get the opportunity to kind of share about themselves and talk about themselves and you having some recognition of their career achievements. Like that
Mhm.
is valuable for some people, right? Like I think it's often that we overcomplicate sometimes really simple things in the career strategy universe, I guess, where it's like actually don't overcomplicate this.
Yeah.
Yes, you might have a value where you can say, let me introduce you to somebody, but sometimes the value you have is just like I'll be engaging with you more on LinkedIn or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that the other misconception with building relationships, it goes into, oh no, I have to, talk to this person every once in a while. I have to talk to this person every day. And I don't think you have to do that. I do think that it being fruitful when you do speak, but also making sure that there is a real cadence there, that really helps too. But I don't think it's just like real friendships. You don't need to be in touch every day.
Yeah,
But when you
please
are,
don't do
it's
that.
really valuable.
Yeah, quality over quantity. Nobody wants to be pinged
Yeah.
every single day. Yeah, I would completely agree. Okay, so let's talk about what, or really who, are the three relationships at work that are really important to focus on and why?
So I think up, down, and across, you should be focused on sponsors, mentors, and peers. They could come in different forms. So that might be clients, your supervisor, your skip level. That could be a colleague that you maybe used to work with. But they could come in different bodies, as we should say. They could come in different roles in the workplace. But that's the common three that you'll see in it: sponsors, mentors, and peers.
Okay, so for someone who is trying to be really thoughtful about this, let's start with sponsors. Explain kind of what this looks like and maybe how they might start building a relationship with them.
So a sponsor is someone that is influential and they likely carry some degree of influence. They probably are titled a leader in the organization. And the first way to build a relationship with any of the three that I just mentioned is observing first, because you're looking for an opportunity, a natural aperture to be able to build that relationship. With a sponsor, what I have found that my clients have been most successful in building relationships with them is getting a win on a cross-functional project, maybe sitting in on some meetings with them, starting to understand what they do really well, because I do think that there is a way for you to bridge a lot of educational gaps and experiential gaps with these three groups of people if
Mhm.
you are strategically building these relationships based off of your strengths and your weaknesses.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I also like how you're like, one of the best ways to build a relationship is to have a win on a project. Like, I think people forget that actually doing work is sometimes the best quote networking or relationship building you can do, right? Nothing kind of speaks louder than like being a great person to work with or being
Oh,
easy to work with,
100%.
right?
100%. And so that's what I find that is the best way to start off with a sponsor. And once you start to understand more about them, how they work, what they maybe need, you could think about some of the things that you've done in your role and how you could be of value to them when you are having those cadences before you reach out to them.
Yeah. What about if you work remotely or hybrid? What are your tips for, so you're not able to maybe join them in a meeting as easily because you don't see every meeting they're part of. What are your tips for kind of recognizing who the potential sponsors are?
So I like to think, so for the last 10 years of my career, I've been remote. Most of my clients are remote. I actually think building relationships remotely is easier. Here's why.
Okay. Yeah.
I
Let's hear
think
your
that it just
case.
opens, I think that it really has what I call flattened the earth by working remotely. People are more accessible to you on, Zoom or Slack, and it's still being exposed to them in meetings. And yes, I'm going to say something that is a little taboo. You should be on video when you're intentionally trying to grow your career. I don't think you need to be on there every day, but that is the key difference is that you naturally have that face time by walking in the building. Whereas if I just saw Lauren McGoodwin just black and white on
Yeah.
the screen, you're not necessarily going to do that
Right. It's
because
not
that's
the
going
same.
up and the physical, being physically present on a call really does engender a lot of trust.
Yeah, we just had a podcast with Lorraine Lee who talks about presentations, and she talks about like the physical piece is really important. Like that, humans read like your facial expressions faster than they're like understanding your words and things like that. So I totally get it. Okay, let's talk about mentors. I know this is kind of a biggie for everyone where they're told their whole career, make sure you have mentors. But then people are like, well, do I go up and tap this person on the shoulder and say, will you be my mentor? It's like, it's this awkward thing for a lot of people. And I bet a lot of people actually have mentors. They just don't necessarily call them that. So part of the whole point of this episode is maybe being thoughtful about like, you might already have all of these things, but you just haven't labeled them as that, at least in your own like notebook or personal space. So talk about mentors and what they look like at work and how to find them.
So the key difference from a sponsor and a mentor and even a peer is that sponsors they are more effective when they're internal to the organization because they can sponsor you and influence you. However, mentors, they can be internal and external. And a mentor, the difference here is that it doesn't have to be someone who's high level. It could be someone who's just a really good communicator. And
Yeah.
maybe they're just one level higher than you. Maybe they're a high level individual contributor. They could be a leader too. They don't have as much influence, and you're not necessarily picking it off that. But the mentor is someone that you have seen that does something extremely well. I will also say that I think the distinctive difference between a sponsor and a mentor is that a sponsor is someone that can kind of help you navigate those political things. For example, we know that maybe going to Kate's office on a Friday when she's gotten the numbers might not be the best time to,
Yeah.
to pitch a new idea. Maybe you do it at the beginning of the month when she's optimistic. That's politics. A sponsor knows that well. However, maybe you don't go to your sponsor when you are having workplace issues, conflicts. Your mentor is the best person to synthesize that. So I do think there's two distinct purposes. One is to keep it straight on the books. They're helping you navigate, helping you grow. And I think that the mentor can help you synthesize whether they're internal or external with those
Yeah.
different things.
I've noticed too, like for me, sometimes I have mentors that they don't even know they're my mentor. Again, like I don't walk around labeling them, but it might be someone where I read their newsletter, I listen to their podcast, I read their content a lot, or I find their advice really helps me through that workplace politic thing. So I think, do you think also that you can have mentors through other means too? Like it doesn't always have to be like a one-to-one relationship either.
It doesn't. And I don't think that it has to be, I think that mentors are really unique in the sense that they don't have to be at work and they can still enrich you holistically. Maybe
Yeah.
you have a mentor and you do music outside of work and you have a mentor and their perspective on life, their
Yeah.
perspective on how to do different things really enrich you holistically and help you at work or in your, just holistically all the way around. I don't think that you find mentors necessarily at work. And I don't think that you should. I think that that's actually where you can get kind of diverse with where you find that person. So if maybe you're having an issue with EQ and your mentor is at a different company, or maybe they're in a club that you're in, that could be the person that could help you coach you through that.
Yeah, you're really making the case for like having hobbies outside of work is actually really good
Yeah.
also for work. So for all of us who have maybe the struggle of like having a life outside of work or like,
Yeah.
you know, dedicating to other things, it's like, no, it can be really good to enrich yourself in other things. I constantly found that about myself. It was like having the side hustle made me better at the main hustle. Or, you know, now that this is the main hustle, like still having interest in other places gives me ideas or perspectives that help me inside this place. So, you know, it's just obviously it's great to also be able to interact one on one with people, but I just want to mention like it's a good case for that. Okay, talk about peers, and then I have one bonus relationship that I want to ask you about. So talk about peer relationship building.
Peer relationship building is the trickiest because you want to use a lot of discernment with all of them, but especially with your peers, especially if they're climbing on the climb. So I do think that you're going into those relationships based off chemistry in a lot of ways. But I do think that you could learn from all three of these groups. I think that you can learn at the peer level better because they are there, they're down on the ground
They're
with
in the
you.
trenches with you.
They're in the trenches. They know how to do their job, and they might have different approaches to doing their job that could either help you do it differently, different perspective. But the difference is that peers are everywhere, and peers can also be influential. So I'll give you a prime example. How many of us know the woman, or of a person, I should say, not a woman, of a person that maybe worked at the front desk? They were a receptionist for a really long time, had been there, very happy in their role as individual contributor, and they, have been through multiple CEOs. They have been through multiple changes of hands, and it's not uncommon to see other leaders leaning over their desk asking for their perspective. That's
Yeah.
someone you should know. I like to think of that um, if we were to compare it to Game of Thrones, when the librarians, they had all their stuff. That is the local fixture in your organization. That is the librarian. They've been there. They're your historian. They know a lot and they can influence, and they're a good person to get to know as well.
Yeah, it's I think about too, like if you're on a team and somebody's been there for 7 years, like they're a good person to get to talk to understand like how do things run around here. And what about for the peer relationships you did mention, like sometimes you're in competition with somebody, like sometimes you guys are peers, yet you're both climbing the ladder or want to, you're so similar that it could be competitive. And also you were talking about directions before, and I just want to mention sponsor is kind of top down, but
Yeah,
peer is across, like thinking about it like
peers
across.
could be across.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so talk about what happens if you're sort of find yourself in a competitive or jealous place with your peer relationship.
So I think that if you're finding yourself in a competitive place with a peer relationship, it's a good idea to maybe step back. You can have a conversation with them, but because it is peer and maybe that's their nature, it could simply be using that person as a rabbit.
Yeah,
They help you get 1% better. Their competition's not bad. I
yeah,
do think, collaboration over competition all the time, but there is some degree of competitive spirit. And I do think that they serve the purpose of helping you get that 1% better every day. I think it's similar to friends though. You may want to scale back or scale forward depending on what you discern about the person, because you're not there to create more drama for yourself and having to use your mentor to maybe talk through that, right? I think it's genuinely understanding that there is enough pie for everyone. And I think if you have that perspective, it naturally rubs off on other people. There is enough pie usually for most people until they kind of get to that director level.
yeah.
Then there's less of your title. That gets more difficult. And maybe you have to kind of scale back and be more strategic about who you're friends with to reduce instances of, confrontation or conflict. But when you're at the individual contributor lane or level in your career and you're not quite there, there's enough pie for everyone.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think also the thing about peer networking that we didn't really touch on is like these are sometimes your friends. Like sometimes your best friends in life come from working together. I mean, there's like that really funny meme where it's like there's nothing more um like nothing bonds two people more than like being at work together or like having
Oh
the
yeah.
same experience, right? Especially if you have like a toxic boss or a toxic workplace, like you'll probably bond really quickly. Are there rules to kind of keeping it a relationship that is more strategic business wise versus friend wise, or is it kind of like at the pure level, it all mixes together?
So I am of the belief that you can make your friends, especially when you're past a particular age. You're going to make
Yeah.
a lot of your friends at work. While I don't agree that they should primarily be at work,
Yeah.
because we've seen that time and time again, there are people, and I think you're looking for the same things in them that maybe you would look for in a friend. In my case, I made a lot of my friends post leaving, meaning I became more intentional about elevating that peer relationship and converting it into a friendship once I left. It made it a lot easier. Your judgment's not clouded. You're not, covering for the
Yeah.
person. You're not seeing them for who they're maybe not because you're friends with them. That's usually easier. But I did want to go back, Lauren, and talk a little bit about cross pollinating the three.
Okay.
Okay. I think you should cross pollinate sponsors, mentors, and peers, and they should be across the organization. They shouldn't just be in your function. Because if we're doing this for career advancement, for career happiness, right? The goal is for you to really get to know people that you really jive with, and maybe that sponsor, that mentor, isn't always in your function. They
Yeah.
could be in finance, and maybe you work in HR. That's certainly been my case, but it also does something amazing. You start to become more well versed with the organization. You're raising your business acumen, and you're able to become that rainmaker. You're not just the expert and leading with your expertise in your function. If your opinion is ever asked for, or there's a genuine discussion about how to do something or best practice, you can lend your perspective because you've diversified where you've built those relationships.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of my closest relationships at Hulu was a graphic designer for the sales team, and I was in recruiting. And she and I just really hit it off, and we would get coffee together and like just agreed on a lot of things. Sometimes we wouldn't even talk about work. Sometimes we would vent about like I'm struggling with this thing, but I loved being able to have sort of insight into a completely different skill set than what I did on a completely different team. It actually made
Yeah.
me probably a better recruiter because I had a little bit more insight into that. So that's a really, really good point. Okay, one bonus relationship that isn't kind of on the list, but I do think is worth talking about is coaches or coaching. Obviously, you hope you're kind of having that coaching relationship with your manager, but what about strategically building a relationship with a coach? And like, what does that look like? Do you find those in the organization, or is that almost always an external one?
So I may have a little bit of bias from my experience with coaches internal. I'll share this. I do believe that it is valuable to have a coach internally, specifically for getting better, right? However, I have found that in some of the feedback that I've received, having a coach internally doesn't necessarily yield the highest results of strategic vulnerability because you're not, even though they have said, that it's private, sometimes those things get out.
Yeah.
And also, I've also seen some cases where managers will try to leverage the internal coach to share feedback that they should be sharing directly with their employee. I have found the most effective ones have been, and I can tell you from experience with my clients, they've had internal coaches, but they've went ahead and invested in an external coach because they wanted someone to be 100% vulnerable with, and they knew that everything we shared was confidential and it had no chance of making it back to their manager, either on purpose or by accident.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that they serve a purpose. And coaches can really take a look at you because they don't know you. So that's the difference. And they're getting to know you. They're able to kind of have that external view of you to help coach you to success.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. I mean, I have a completely different viewpoint on external coaching now too. Obviously, when I was working at the company, I felt like, or at least back in the day, I thought it was something only executives got. I absolutely think that having an external coach is so incredible. And if you can work it into your negotiations when you accept a new job or something like that, especially if you're trying to get more pay, like try to ask for that. I know a lot of companies have taken that off the table in terms of something they're willing to offer, but boy, you see the difference in people who have kind of that resilience in the workplace and adaptability, and part of it is that they have a coach. They have
Yeah,
someone
they,
who's in
they
their
have
corner.
they have their village.
Yeah.
I also think, Lauren, that I'll share this too. So you were in recruiting. A lot of my executive clients that I recruited, actually, when I extended them an offer, they needed to talk it over with their coach.
Yeah.
They make sure that it was in alignment, internal, like intrinsically and extrinsically with the things they talked about for the next role. And ever since I saw that, that's when I actually started investing in my own coaches. I was like, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah, I did see that. I would say um they yes, I saw that, but also sometimes it would get to the place where they was like they couldn't make a decision without their coach, but a good coach doesn't make you rely on them in that way. So that's
I
something to
agree.
also keep in mind when you're thinking about your coach or you're interviewing a coach. Obviously, we have career coaching on Career Contessa, and it's something that I always look for when I pre-vet them is like, do you understand actual coaching or are you just trying to be like a crutch for somebody? And that's not the goal.
Yeah.
They need to be able to be decisive and make decisions and all that thing, good stuff. Okay, I wanted to ask about like ideally you are identifying these relationships, you are building these relationships, and they're going to support you, right? In your career advancement or your development. What happens if these relationships don't support you? Or I mean, is there ever a case, a negative case for like you've invested all this time in these relationships and it doesn't pan out? Like I'm thinking about people who are maybe job searching right now and like, they're like, "Oh, I've tapped my network and like nothing's happening," or um I don't know, I want the promotion and like it's not happening. What's your advice for kind of those that tough feedback?
Yeah. So I think internally for someone that's trying to get a promotion and maybe building these relationships don't seem to be working, it is a good idea to go directly to your manager to start to understand what their perceptions are about you in the workplace as well.
Yeah,
Because most people that are in a workplace, I'd like to think that they would be open to helping you when they have time to do so. I also think you have to look at your approach. How are you approaching them? Are you just going to them immediately asking for something, or have you built some degree of rapport so then it's natural for you to go in and ask, hey, I've worked with you over the last couple of months, really enjoyed how we were able to synthesize and build on this project and we closed it before you know time to completion, and I would love to build a regular cadence with you. I think it's all in the approach and having that. That's also where a coach might come in to understand, to give you kind of some, find out some 360 feedback to understand what's going on. But I do think if you've really done all you can, it's really important for you to go to your manager and understand what perceptions are to see if you can get that. And I think it's important to try what you can and do those things before you want to activate a job search. And in full transparency, Lauren, 50% of the time with my clients, when we are focused on an internal promotion, it's not that it's not possible for them. It's because what happens is they've been sitting in their role a little bit longer than maybe they would have liked. And so their time frame window might be a little bit shorter. Maybe I want to get a promotion. They want to get a promotion a year. It's not possible. The business need didn't line up to the opportunity. And then they start looking. And I can totally understand that. So it all depends. And so then 50% of the time it becomes an external search for a higher level role.
yeah. So in that situation, I mean, I love the kind of case studies with your clients for people who are looking to advance internally. Is that something that you need to be strategically thinking about, like way ahead of a year? Okay.
I think that you need to be thinking about it in your first 90 days. You are being sized up for whether you're hypo in the first 90 days of work. Doesn't mean that you can't get an opportunity to change perceptions or have an opportunity to maybe change that. But typically in that first 90 days, you do want to be intentional about how you show up, how you spend that first phase observing, how you spend that second phase doing, and then that third phase improving. I think it's really important that you think about that at the very beginning. But even if, you didn't, I think it's a good idea to think about things in a full year, the way we do with a performance review cycle as well.
Yeah. I think one of the big key takeaways from everything that's happening in the job market right now is you have agency in your career, way more agency than maybe you think you have in your career. And I think we give a lot of the agency to the companies, but I think, and I'm kind of a broken record on this on the podcast, but like proactively steering in the direction of your career is so important. And I know I totally get it. You're fatigued from the job search and you just want to like put it on autopilot for a little bit, or you just got the promotion. You're so busy trying to figure out what your new role is that you don't have time to think about that. What is your best tips for people who, they're busy, they don't have time to do the career development thing in the maybe in the perfect way that they would like what's your advice for people to kind of like stay proactive in their career development?
I think you should turn your career development into a project. And that means if you need to open up a Google sheet and put down some strategic relationships, what they can offer, what function they're in, and start strategically building those relationships first by observing and then by asking. And then by building a cadence so that way you're keeping that relationship alive and, at front of mind. That's the first thing, especially if you can't afford coaching, and you want to coach yourself to success. I think the best way is to be intentional and that everything you do when it comes to a promotion is consistency and a cadence.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
had this post on LinkedIn yesterday where I was like, the most successful people I interview teach me that there's no secret to success. It's about being really good at boring stuff, which is consistency. It's
Yeah.
showing up on a regular basis. Yeah. I think there's, I've used this phrase a lot, glitter and glue. And like, I think there's such a
Oh,
focus on the glitter moments, but like glue the boring, like get good at the glue. Like the glitter is like a flash in the pan, it's cool, but the glue is what sustains it. Also, one thing I've started to do or encourage people to do is once a quarter, similar to maybe how you do this with your finances or other things in your life, but once a quarter, make a date with yourself to be like, I'm carving out 3 hours. I'm going to go to a cafe and I'm going to think about my career and I'm going to be thoughtful about it. I think just even taking the time to self reflect and having that carved out time is, again, it's very intentional. And all I can tell you is that I see people who do it that way versus people who are just reacting to what's coming at them. One is a much more calm approach. And I'm like, oh, my nervous system prefers that direction. I'm like
yeah.
very anxious just watching the other one. Oh my gosh. Well, April, this is so valuable, especially I think right now when there is so much change. It's like this is stuff that you can control in your career. And
Yep.
if you're feeling like your career is maybe a little out of control or you're a little uncertain, do these things. I think it brings a lot of confidence and just like clarity to what's next. So share as we wrap up where people can find you, learn more about you, if they're interested in your offerings, etc.
Sure. So if you are a mid-level woman, meaning manager, senior manager, director with aspirations of being the top 1%, meaning going as far as you can in the organization. So my philosophy is if you're going to be there, you might as well climb.
I
That's
like that.
usually my opening line. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram. I primarily work with my clients on career advancement. However, if you are job seeking, I do offer VIP days. So you're able to work with me in two ways, as well as a third offering that I recently just started, which is what I call career insurance. So if you are someone that's working, but you want to start building your brand based off of your thought leadership, that is also something that I'm offering as well.
Oh, I love that. That's really cool. Okay, we'll put all of that in the show notes, a couple of options for people. And yes, connect with me and April on LinkedIn. We're both very active on there.
Yep.
And this is another, I've been having a lot of people from LinkedIn relationships come on the show. And I'm trying to prove the point to everybody, like, see, this is a great way to like take the relationship off LinkedIn and continue to build it. So April, I'm so fortunate that I've been able to connect with you there and then continue building it. And thank you so much for this incredible advice.
Thank you so much for having me on today.